Welcome back to the Renk Seeds of Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Max Renk. Harvest is wrapping up across the Midwest, and today we're taking a look back at the 2025 season to unpack what we learned. From this year's weather patterns and disease pressure to fungicide timing and seed performance, this episode is focused on turning this year's results into opportunities for next spring and beyond. I'm joined by familiar voices from the podcast, Karl Bobholz, Alex Renk, and Jeff Renk, to walk us through their biggest wins, surprises, and lessons of the 2025 growing season. We'll cover what we saw in the Corn Belt, how southern rust and sudden death syndrome impacted growers' yields, and what this year's plot data is revealing as we look forward to 2026. Let's jump in. Welcome back to another episode of Renk Seeds of Innovation. Today we're going to be talking about harvest insights. I know this was a more stereotypical, what we'd somewhat even venture to say for many parts of the Midwest, a normal growing season, which is ironic in its own sense, but there was a lot less ups and downs. I know we talked about there was a couple wind events out west, but generally we didn't see the deluge of rain we saw last year or extreme highs and extreme lows. We'll start with Karl today. What did you see out in the fields? For those of our listeners that don't know, Karl spent a lot of time on the road this year. And how many locations did you end up going to, Karl?
A lot. Lost count all the way back in July.
Exactly right. So what did you see that was good, bad, and the ugly?
So if you think about 25 in a recap, the southern Corn Belt, or say Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, had a lot of southern rust. You had some pockets of other diseases, some tar spot, especially in northern Illinois and Wisconsin. Minnesota had some southern rust. All those areas of southern rust or any foliar diseases, a couple things that came to mind is fungicide applications. The growers that sprayed the fungicide, they're seeing the nice benefits. However, there are some growers that did spray a little early, right after tasseling and not before brown silk. They kind of ran out of protection from southern rust. So if you look at our lineup, that full RM maturity, RK773 Tricepta and RK8585 Tricepta, they were probably the shining stars against southern rust. And now they're showing it in the yield results. They're towards the top of the trials pretty much in every location that the growers or the dealers mentioned that there was southern rust. So that's kind of interesting. We also saw a lot of performance of our main line products like RK630 Tricepta. That is doing very well across the whole Corn Belt in that 102 day. And then as you go earlier, we have a new product, RK4545 in Wisconsin, Minnesota, have been looking extremely attractive and very high yielding performance. That's a nice product for us in our lineup.
And then Jeff, does that bounce off what you saw as well?
Yeah, I did perform my share of customer support missions this fall, Michigan to Nebraska. And I'll call it windshield farming of the highest order. Drive by a lot of fields going to and from. And disease will be the big story this year, how it impacts your crop. The southern rust we talked about is probably the biggest story. What a lot of people don't realize is how big the crop is. I think everybody realizes it, but what it means when it's hanging in the field. You've got a lot of corn hanging on weak and rotten stalks. And this is going to probably be the next big story this growing season is farmers who haven't gotten out and gotten after it. Some guys in the north are waiting on wet corn or what they perceive as wet corn. And unfortunately, the stalk rots are very active. They've already done their damage. And now we're just waiting for a wind event to create what we call awareness in the product management game. I think there's some more tears to be shed yet.
Well, maybe not as uplifting. So what can we do to get ahead of that there?
Well, there's really only about one thing to do, Max, and that is, like it or not, the crop needs to be in. And we're looking at freezing weather. It's not getting dry. It's not getting ripe. For better or for worse, this is your crop. Get after it. Get it in before it's on the ground. That's all I can tell our growers.
And then, Alex, what did you see from the soybean side?
This year was like the year that everything looked to be right for soybeans. Not too many droughty areas at all. We got 23 inches of rain, and it almost seemed like, oh, here's another 4 days, here's an inch. That covered a very wide swath of the Midwest. Expectations are very high, and in a lot of areas, they made it. I mean, we're seeing 80s, 90s, even a couple hundreds on some of these yields. But I think some people got a little disappointed. I myself, I'm looking at our show plot right across our office, and some of it's topped off at 57, 60. To me, it was The one thing that was kind of overriding here was sudden death came really late. And sudden death is one of those that all varieties are not created equal. There are some that have much better SDS than others. And you can kind of tell in the results, the ones that whether the SDS did much better. So that's kind of what we're seeing this year. Actually, the big thing that I was expecting to see a lot more is white mold, because it was wet the whole year. Usually the savior is if it's wet and hot, you don't have white mold. The spores cannot take. That's not ideal for the spores to get into the plants. So we had wet and hot instead of wet and cool. Wet and cool is when you really need to get nervous and get spraying.
And is that why we saw some of the issues with our southern rust, or is that just because we're watching an epidemiology spread? Because I know there's been a lot of migratory in our historically localized diseases in corn.
Southern rust does not overwinter in the northern corn belt. However, it is thriving in the southern corn belt, the delta area. And if we had 94, 95, 96 million acres of corn, there's a lot of corn in the delta. So there's a lot of stock down there. And that wind that we had in that July timeframe from the south, where it was all hot and humid, that all was coming off the Gulf. That came across a whole bunch of acres, and that southern rust came northward. Typically, southern rust in this area is once out of 10 years, 20 years. And now in some areas of our marketing area, it's 2 out of the last 2 years. So it's going to,
I think that's 100%.
we'll work on this. There are some cool background, some newer tropical backgrounds that we have been looking at the last couple of years, and they're coming into our lineup now. We'll have some tolerance brought into our lineup in this year's for 26, and then also probably going into 27. Trying to find some of these additional products that provide yield with or without southern rust is going to be the key. And then also, there's some areas, the combines are pretty black this year from ear molds too. All these diseases, the corn is running pretty hot and on the edge all summer long with the warm nights. So this corn kind of died and dried. And sometimes when it dies, the ear husk doesn't open up, right? And then it creates a big old greenhouse effect on that kernel. And that mold is really spreads across that ear. And I know a lot of growers are sniffling and sneezing from all the molds in the air. Combines are pretty black because of them too.
And for those who did not have the pleasure of interacting with the Renk home site, there was more than enough sniffling and season here following harvest. So on that note, I know we mentioned it briefly, but we talked about fungicide application here. Where did people go wrong when it came to applying the fungicide?
I think this year, a lot of growers were trying to watch their expenditures. So they were really focused on their high productive acres and spraying. They also got on, I think, on the earlier side of that spray window, kind of right after tasseling, and not pushing the back side of the spray window, which is brown silk, when the ear is 100% fertilized. So it makes that brown silk. That's kind of the back side of the spray window for fungicide. Typically, a fungicide is only good for about 21 days of effectiveness. So the growers that were trying to push the early side of the window or got luck of the draw, they were sprayed first. They probably saw it not protect later in the season like they were hoping. The second thing I would say is it's not just fungicide. We're seeing huge benefits with fungicide. I also think there were some growers skimping back on nitrogen too, getting down to that 0.7 per bushel. And if these growers are getting 225, 230, 260, it takes a lot of nitrogen to get there. So if they were skipping back a little bit, that causes the plant to be under stress. It causes the plant to have more stalk issues because that plant is under stress. So it can't just protect itself long-term throughout the season. There was 2 factors, I think, happening in 25.
The other thing with growers, when you talk to them this fall, was timing. It became evident to a lot of growers they needed fungicide late in the season. Nobody's set up to do it themselves. They were relying on probably a local co-op or a local spray or air, and they can't get across all the acres at once. And so they got across the acres, but maybe the timing wasn't ideal.
And do you think that some of these new sprayer drone operations can bridge some of that gap?
Certainly they can, but and it's easy to talk about sitting here in the comfort of our office, having a cup of coffee. But the reality is, a drone does not cover that many acres by itself. And it's a great rescue, but if you're thinking you're going to do thousands of acres with a drone, that's probably not realistic.
And there was some growers that had spray drones done, applications with spray drones, and maybe those applicators were trying to push the envelope too with patterns. So there was a lot of streaking happening this year too. And with the heavy disease pressures, You saw streaking from drones, you saw streaking from helicopters, you saw streaking from airplanes.
Sure. Yeah.
It just depends on how much they were pushing those rigs and trying to get the acres covered. You can increase the pattern, but sometimes when you increase the width of the pattern, you lose the edges of the pattern, right?
Yep.
So all of a sudden the streaks show up. And then there was a lot of conversation over the last 45 days around streaks in cornfields, especially.
As we talked about, we're pulling this crop out of the ground, good, bad, or ugly, and or indifferent. Ultimately, here for us, that translates into plot data. And I think this is important for us to capture now because we're starting to see a lot of it, and we're seeing it from our independent trials, and we're seeing it from the home site and our other sites that fall under our purview. Personally, I think it's a lot of fun, but we're going to talk about them and what we're using them for going into this next 2026 season. So I'll hand it over to you, Alex, first for what you thought was the most exciting thing you saw this year for plots.
From a soybean standpoint, this is probably one of the more interesting 2-year combinations we've ever had, because this year was all about, for the most part, was all about top end yield. So it was out there. Last year was all about stress. What could survive under the 14-inch deluge of rain in the spring? Very compact, very brutal spring planting conditions, and then no rain in August. Two things come out of this. This is a prime illustration of not to farm for last year's results, because if everybody looks at next year is going to be, we're going to get another 300 bushel yield corn, we're going to get 100 bushel yield soybean season, it's not going to happen. It's odds. It's no 2 years are the same. But with the 2 years we have, this is going to be great for essentially the breeding programs, because you got stuff coming through under a lot of stress, and then you can have same material coming through under a lot of yield potential. So you're seeing genetic potential, you're seeing yield stress, or disease stress, I should say. Between those two, then you should have very stable products that have come through. Unlike years where you get 3 years of stress, you're going to see high-end yield, but you're not going to always select for high-end yield because of the conditions. Or if you have 3 years of high-end yield, all of a sudden you get a nice droughty disease year, all of a sudden those products aren't going to look so good. So this is kind of, when you combine the 2 years together, you're going to have some really good stories to tell about the products.
And so this is actually a really great point, because I want to bring up a historic to fill in some of my understanding as well. And this is exactly off of what you're saying, Alex, talking about how we need to look at multiple years to get a good, stable product that can handle a lot of different stresses and top yielding. And I know this is primarily to you, Jeff. Isn't this exactly kind of where Drought Guard came into our lineup years ago?
Yeah, Drought Guard was very good to us over the last, I don't know how many years it's been, lineup 15 anyway. It was promoted as a stability gene to level out the tough years and make hybrid more competitive. In our lineup, something about Drought Guard really loved the Great Lakes, which is counterintuitive, but that's Jeff's observation. Working with those products for years and years and years. It probably wasn't ever documented. I know very few seed companies capitalize it. Very few seed companies have a footprint in the Great Lakes like Renk Seed does. But the products did fantastic in eastern Wisconsin and also in Michigan. And it's really what brought them to the forefront and made them catch our eye. And then you couple that with drought resistance and the ability to throw on an extra 6, 8, 10 bushel in those 4 to 6 week dry spells in July and August that we seem to get in the Midwest. And it made them very compelling products. And hopefully they find a way forward with that trait.
Do you have anything to add there, Karl?
That Drought Guard, it was a trait, biotech trait, and it was also the breeding side of it, right? So it was a 2-arm approach. The breeding side of it's still moving forward. And then really what that is stress tolerance. They really worked on stress tolerance of those inbreds. They identified alleles. The original trait provider identified the alleles that had good stress tolerance. And then they combined it with the Drought Guard gene, right? And that was a nice 1-2 combination. We're seeing less and less of those traits coming forward in the pipeline, but they're still using that stress understanding of the stress tolerance of those inbreds, and that part's still moving forward. So it's been a couple years, but they are moving some of that concept, especially the stress tolerance of the parental knowledge, moving that forward inside of our triceptas.
So, Alex, as you mentioned, we looked at our now across a stress year and a higher performing year for soybeans, and this is going to go to both sides, the corn and the soybean side here. When we're looking at these products, I know we talked about we are pretty aggressive when it comes to cutting products that don't perform.
Yes.
But now that we have 2 years for many of our products, as well as for many of our experimentals, seeing both sides of the coin, how do you start making determinations from there?
At this point, we're a little bit limited on how many varieties we can have in our line, because most of the stuff we actually, on our own production here, we only have so many bins. And we don't have a lot of on-farm storage. Out west is a little different. The early stuff, we actually have growers out west that can do it. We can actually have more in our lineup out there. It comes down to, I'm going to look at my lineup and are they performing? And if they're not performing, then we start looking really hard at replacing them. That's kind of just the general strategy. I've tried to be a little bit more conservative the last couple years. Again, last year was a stress year. Putting new stuff in the lineup didn't make a lot of sense because I'm not sure if we saw really the high-end genetic expression. And at the end of the day, we want to see high yields. That's what keeps you on the farm. That's what your customers want. Then you go slightly behind it is the disease package. And then sometimes if you get enough yield, then the defensive package can be a little bit even further away. But I mean, ideally we want everything with high yield and disease package. So now at this point, we have a lot of good data using both years together to look at varieties and move something forward that's going to have both.
I know it's still a little bit different just for the breeding process in corn here, but ultimately you have two very different years of growing. And where do you start making the determinations from there? We can start with you, Karl, and then we'll get to you, Jeff.
How I really look at it is I look at our lineup as a whole. You go product by product, see how that product performance has been doing over the last couple of years, this year, last year, and see, all right, is this something I need to work on adjusting? Do we need to bring a new product in to replace this one? I take notes all summer long on, I call them optimistic notes, so stalks, roots, green snap, disease, understand, okay, there's a lot of weaknesses here or there's a lot of strengths. And then you try to build packages. In corn, we really want to have 3-4 products with a grower, just because it allows us for genetic diversity of that corn germplasm. But to do that, you also have to have the lineup to do that, right? So you got to create the packaging within the lineup. So like right now, all of our research data is in, and we're kind of going through and saying, all right, which are the ones that we really need to look at to come out of the lineup? And then, all right, if these come out, what we're going to come in with and look at all these experimentals that we tested. In our research, half of our trial entries are experimentals. They're the ones that are tapping to come into the Renk lineup. So you always have things on deck, and you're trying to see, all right, what's in our lineup now? How is it performing? And can we improve agronomics? Can we improve yield? And how does it fit with the other products that are still in our lineup?
And so, Jeff, how do you balance that? Because I know in your career, you've had more than a couple hybrids that have now been here for almost as long as your career has been.
From my perspective, and doing it as long as I did, really great frontline products come along no more than once every 5 years and probably 8 or 10 years. The rest of it is kind of shuffling and managing for the best of what's left. But the really great products that come out every 5 or 10 years, you have to have those. You can't ignore those. No, those are the easy shot. They're easy. And especially if they come in and they prove themselves with a 2 or 3 year run, and they're just always the top. And we've had a family of products that have defined a lot of my career. Going back from starting with 579 in our lineup now, backing up through 568, 48 before that. The best that we could have in our lineup and an ideal product for Renk Seed from maturity. So then after that, it's managing around those 3, 4, 5 really top flight products in your lineup. Hitting maturity that's the necessary. We deal with a lot of livestock farmers. And so we wind up with products that if we were a Central Corn Belt company, we focus on some different things, maturity being huge for us, especially being in the north, and then the amount of livestock that we interface with, where a Central Corn Belt company may not have to worry about that so much. Another big thing at Renk Seed is the number of environments that we sample. If you're a Central Corn Belt company, flat black dirt.
Yeah, way too easy.
Yeah. So we have the interface of compressed maturities as you move north in the Corn Belt and get closer to the Great Lakes, and the variety of soil types. And then the management. If you have livestock, your management is different than if you farm Central Corn Belt. It brings a lot of different things that we have to interact with that those sissies in the sense of Corn Belt don't have to deal with.
So you're saying in the north, it just makes us tougher.
And we're tough. We're tough.
Winter is coming.
To tie those two together here, now we saw it in the field, we saw it in our plot data. We've kind of talked about how we've made those steps each part of the way. How do we turn each year's lessons? Because I know each year is different, and these last 2 years prove it unto themselves being very different years. How do we turn that into success in the future for us and for our growers?
It isn't just this year and last year. We've got to back up 3 to 5 years. There's 3 to 5 years of knowledge available to us, and you have to go back and sample that. I haven't always had a philosophy. I learned the philosophy the hard way, believe it or not. It's how farm boys learn. It's easy to look at plot data and to say to yourself, well, look how great this hybrid is, 300 bushels or whatever it is, or it's 10 bushels better than anything else in the plot. We have a lot of locations. We have a lot of reps. Once you hone in on something that's clearly dominant or looks like it's going to be something that you can't ignore, you probably need to spend some time and look at the other side of the coin. How bad can it be? And very few people do that. There's a lot of reps out there. We tend to look at the reps that we want to see. Look at that big number, 300 bushels, 295, whatever it is. And it's a little like dating. You've got to look under the hood and see where the warts are. And you better know them ahead of time when you're making product selections.
Looking at historics there and backing it up is a great point. And I think a great way to actually prove that is we can talk about the Peking gene in soybeans. I know, Alex, you're the one who kind of championed that here, but can you kind of give us some of the backstory there?
With the Peking, it's been around a long time, probably 20 or 30 years old, maybe even longer. The problem has been that when you put the Peking gene in, it took about 3 or 4 or 5 bushels of yield out of your final product. Part of that was thought to be it did not play well with brown stem. Now we're starting to see varieties where you're getting brown stem resistant and the Peking gene. So that association has been overcome by the breeders. And so last year we kind of had a lot of material coming through with the Peking gene. I would not say it was bad, but it was like, oh no, it's like, oh, this is a clear winner. But last year was not a Peking year, to be honest. Other diseases were the problem. It wasn't stuff in the ground. This year we got high yield conditions. We had conditions where the gene is going to come into play. And it actually looks really good with the ones we have in our lineup. The Peking's there. You should not look at it as taking a hit for using the Peking gene.
You know, using those two anecdotes here, how we're continuing to provide value to our growers. And primarily we're a seed company, right? So it's all about the seed and what we can do with our genetics and our lineup. But as we've talked about, and I know in the last episode, we gave you a peek behind what corn production looks like here at Renk Seed. Clearly, there's a lot more to than just pulling the seed out of the ground. So look over here to you, Karl, but what are some other ways that we provide value, and what are things that are important to growers that is not just the seed itself?
This year, we're doing some biological testing this year. Sometimes I have to bite my tongue because, growing up, there's a lot of things that go on the market, right? The vendors provide us a lot of data. And sometimes you're like, that data can't be real because of how the data looks, right? So you really, like Jeff said before, you got to look under the hood and figure out what truly is happening with that, what interaction is truly happening. So we took a whole bunch of products, roughly 6 different products, and we put them in research. And we put them on different different products. We have them on 4 different hybrids. We put them also in strip trials with our farmer dealer plots. We'll see what the data looks like. It's pretty promising right now. We'll see what the strip plot data comes over the next few weeks. There are some true benefits of biologicals and unleashing the natural agrobacteria inside the soil and making sure that we're mining or using all the fertility that's in the soil, especially when the growers have to, fertilizer cost is pretty high, so growers have to pencil that, right? So if these true biological things can really unlock some things in the soil instead of adding more nutrients through fertilizer, it could be a win. We just got to get repeatability. We got to get win percentages. It's all good if it has 5 bushel advantage or 4 bushel advantage, right? But what's the data behind it? How consistent is it? And that's one thing I always struggled with is that growing up, coming through the seed industry, biologicals Sometimes it wins, sometimes it loses, but most times it lost, right? So we got to figure that out. We're looking at it right now. We'll hopefully have some news over the next few weeks, but it's a high win percentage. This one product that we're looking at, and it could be done at the seed box. A grower has a bag, he's put it into the planter. We can put it right there on the seed, right when it goes in the planter. Or if he has a box, we could put it on the top of the box, let it go through the conveyor into the planter, and it will be fully treated with seed lubricant so that it works with John Deere's, Cases, Kinsey's, all those great planters. So more to come, but it's pretty impressive. Yeah, the data that I saw wasn't true, but I think the data that we are building here has a lot of trust behind it. And we're also doing additional things like stalk rot. We're cutting all these plants to see how the stalk rot is responding. Can we reduce stalk rots? Stalk rots happen early on. Typically, they're a seedling disease that kind of invade that plant early on, causes the crown to go under stress. Can we protect it with some of these biologicals?
And, as Karl mentioned earlier, it all comes back to continuous improvement and innovation. Testing ideas, validating results, and finding the right fit for each grower's acres. From the test fields we conduct to the seed dropped into your planter box each spring, every step we take at Renk Seed is about helping you make confident decisions for your fields. Harvest may signal the end of the growing season, but it's also the start of planning for what's next. I'm Max Renk. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Renk Seeds of Innovation.
Be sure to hit subscribe for a notification when a new episode drops each month, and follow Renk on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and X. This has been the Renk Seeds of Innovation podcast, innovating agriculture one seed at a time.